welcome back to the channel. As you can see, we're in something slightly different today. This is as we work with the gearbox, there's second, a 1983 T25 Caravelle VW with 193,000 miles on it, so that's quite some mileage. The first thing I'm going to say is that I'm just trying to still work out this gearbox because it is dogleg. It has a dogleg first gear. As a bus comes towards us, we'll have to stop yet again. But yeah, first is down and over. Yeah, so you're down and over into first, and then second is up. Slightly vague in the gearbox, if I'm quite honest. With no power steering, we're overtaking a smart car. Yeah, so first gear there, coming up into second, there's second. Yes, we're gonna go to third from second, which is up into third. Yeah, good shout, good shout. So what we're going to do is actually take it to the seaside today. I feel like it's one of those vehicles that needs to be shot next to the seaside. So we're going to make our way to the seaside. I'm going to get to grips with this dogleg gearbox. I've shot a few things with dogleg gearboxes, but it's been a while. None of them were vans like this though. So it's very, very different experience. But make sure you like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, but onwards to the beach, or at least a seaside town. So, 1983 VW Caravelle, sometimes called a Vanagon, Van T3 in other places in the world, like America. Very big in America, these sort of vehicles. We come down into second gear, which is, again, in front of us because of the dogleg gearbox. I must admit, this is actually an absolute pleasure to drive. We'll leave it in second there. Perfect. That 1.9 litre pretty much Beetle derived engine right out the back is an odd experience, if I'm honest. But it's cool. It's an odd experience, but it's super cool. The gearbox is wayward, let's say, but enjoyable. It's fun to actually put this thing into gear, and with the engine being, again, all the way at the back, you don't really get a sense of it actually being anywhere near the vehicle because it's so far back. Yes, you can hear it, don't get me wrong, but I can barely sense that engine actually in the car whatsoever, or the van whatsoever. As we stop, pop the indicator on, we're going to go back into first. Now, there is actually a lockout in first, which is, it's odd, don't get me wrong, but it actually lets you, or doesn't let you, go into first whatsoever when you're driving. There's actually a physical lockout, like you would find in reverse in a lot of cars. There is actually a lockout, so you can't really grab first that easily in this vehicle because, if I'm honest, they're relatively torquey, so you do have that second gear right in front of you, so you don't necessarily have to go right down into first every time you pull out. If you're, you know, slowly creeping up to a junction and you've still got momentum, you don't necessarily have to grab first, which is quite nice in a sense. That's obviously from larger vehicles, trucks and stuff, and they've obviously in the 80s thought it was a good idea to put it in one of these. I don't mind it, I can get to grips with stuff quite easily, but if you are actually interested in buying one of these, that is the first thing I would say, is that the dogleg gearbox could be hard for some people to get used to, but for me it's okay. I don't really mind it. What's it like to drive though, as you know, someone that likes to drive cars? Now, second gear still, we're going to come on the brake down, big steering wheel, and because the front wheels and steering is actually here, you're able to pitch this quite nicely around the roads of the UK. It's not exactly massive, it's similar size to a van, if anything, like this Transit. It's literally identical to that, but where you're positioned quite far, we'll keep it in second for the roll into second seat, easy. Yeah, because you're, you know, far forward in the van, it doesn't feel necessarily like anything else I've driven. It feels very, very different in a sense because you're so far forward, because you're over pretty much the front axle, or at least sat on it. But it makes it easier to drive, in my opinion. Yes, you've got a longer wheelbase backwards than you would say in a conventional van, in a sense, but I don't think that's a bad thing. I think it might be slightly easier to, you know, park in a sense compared to other vans. But in the 80s, mate, if I'm honest, they did cool interiors. It smells like the 80s in this car. It's like, if you know the smell, I've got the same smell when I see it on RS Turbo. That smell of these seats are fantastic. I absolutely love the smell. It smells just like a proper old 80s car. Seats though, let's talk about the interior. The seats are super comfortable. They're actually captain's chairs, so you can cruise along the promenade of your local seaside town with these captain's chairs. And of course, because this is a larger vehicle, there is a lot of room in here, but it's relatively sparse. There isn't too much to really go wrong in here. You've got a cigarette lighter in this one. You've got pretty much, that's it. There is a radio, an aftermarket radio, and your heater controls, but apart from that, there isn't really anything else to go wrong in here. The dials and stuff in front of me are relatively accurate, you know, 30 mile an hour, we're doing 30 mile an hour. It's actually got a clock this side, no rev gauge, funnily enough, but we do have, of course, petrol gauge, which is saying quarter of a tank, not too bad. But the talking point is that it's got 193,000 miles on it. Does it feel like it? Does it feel like it's got 193,000 miles on it? To be honest, not really. It doesn't really feel like it. In fact, I know these, you know, cars are built to last, apart from the rust issues. We'll get onto that in a minute. But I don't feel like this feels like it's done nigh on 200,000 miles. Again, this comes from an era where they were built properly, in my opinion. They were built really well, and it rides really nicely. It's still sat on these standard springs, and talking to the owner, he's in two minds whether the engine is actually still the complete stock standard one that actually came with the vehicle in '83. So if that vehicle is this vehicle, and you know the engine and stuff has done that mileage, 193,000 miles, with real no catastrophic things to take the engine out with, then I think that's enough of a shout. So let's talk about the talking points of ownership, because if you're watching this video and you actually want to physically go and buy one of these, what are they like? Well, price wise, I did see a few on eBay, very rusty ones for, you know, sub 3 grand. This one will knock you in at about 7 for quite a nice one. Yes, they're still going to have some, you know, various issues. A few things to do with rust, of course. Rusty cars are rusty, 80s cars are always rusty, so definitely wheel arches, bottom of doors are not too bad on these, but replacement panels aren't too bad. This one has had a full respray at some point and replacement panels, because there's swage lines that are missing and various bits and bobs, but it's still relatively structurally nice. All cars from this era will be rusty though, you've got to remember that. So trying to find one with no rust, unless you're paying 30,000-40,000 pounds for a really mint condition, completely blown apart, you know, completely welded up vehicle, you're probably going to have some sort of rust issues somewhere. The next point, especially of ownership, is the windscreen. Now, new windscreen, yeah, this one had a new windscreen very recently, but the one thing to talk about is that, let me go for a second, yes, we're on a slight hill, she still did it. The thing to talk about is the sides. Now, talking to the owner, this is a relatively common thing with the T25s of this generation. They actually leak from the bottom of the windscreen into what is, in theory, especially this side, the fuse box. So you've really got to be very conscious about that, especially when you're going to have a look at one. You can actually drop the glove box down and just check all the wiring and stuff and see if there's any, you know, corrosion or dampness in there whatsoever. It's quite an easy thing to actually look at, but that is something to point out as we go past Cowes on the Isle of Wight. Lovely place to be, lovely setting for this vehicle. But one thing you've really got to watch is that, because there's a lot of earths down there as well, and of course the earths start to get corroded, or they just, you know, aren't very happy, then you're going to notice a lot of problems, especially with starting, lights, various things like that. It's going to be a slight problem if you were to have some sort of water ingress into those parts of the vehicle. Other than that though, yes, there's, again, I'm going to go back to the rust. There is rust problems in this vehicle. You know, they always will be in these vehicles. But if you find a genuinely nice one, this was bought from an elderly lady who absolutely loved it. She even ran the owner through how to start it properly by dabbing the throttle and actually starting it and cranking it and all this sort of stuff. So, you know, someone that really loved this car, and thankfully the owner now has gone in and replaced a few things that he was a bit skeptical on, you know, wiring and various other little bits and bobs, which again I would say is one of those things you're going to need to do. Wiring and electronics in one of these is, you know, they're aged cars, they're slightly older, so you're going to get various little bits and bobs like that. It's just how old cars are. And yeah, as an overall package and as a sort of up and coming classic, in my opinion, they're relatively cheap to get into, cheap to modify as well. Panels are easy to replace if needs be, if you wanted to actually go and replace anything on this car, or vehicle, or van for that matter. But it's just a glorious car to drive, or van to drive. It is the nicest setting. You're sat in this really comfy seat, big steering wheel, loads of space, get your kids and surfboards, whatever in the back, cruise to the beach, and just enjoy a really, really nice vehicle to drive, because it's not hard to drive this thing. Yes, there's no power steering, so you might, you know, find it hard sometimes to actually get in and out of spaces, but I mean, anything from the 80s with no power steering, it's just how it is, isn't it? But overall, I think this is a really cool bit of classic up-and-coming van that you could do stuff to. They're not expensive, they're cool, in my opinion. They were, I'd say they're classed as an ugly duckling in a sense, especially to a lot of VW owners out there. This was sort of the generation where they went a bit boxy and a bit funny, but I appreciate it. I think it's of era, and I actually genuinely like this. I think it's cool, and at the end of the day, if you've got one and you can do bits to it, good on you, because they're only going up in price like everything is. Anyway guys, thank you so much for watching. If you did like this video, please give it a like. Any people that own these, get in the comments and tell me more about your one. Let me know what you think of your T25/T3/Vanagon America, something like that. They're called Vanagons, I think it's called. Anyway, thank you so much for watching guys. We'll see you on the next one.